Good morning and welcome to the PIOJ preliminary estimates and quarterly update. We will be hearing from the Director General, and everyone who is in the meeting will be able to post your questions at the end. So we'll be watching the chat, and we'll be collecting your questions to ask. If you do wish to ask a question with your open mic, you may raise your hand at the end and indicate. So happy to have you again for another quarterly press briefing. And we now hand over to the Senior Director, Corporate Marketing and Communications, Mrs. Marcia Blake Hall.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the media and those joining us virtually. Thanks for joining us at the Planning Institute of Jamaica for our quarterly press briefing. Today, the Director General, Dr. Wayne Henry, will provide preliminary estimates on the performance of the economy for the July to September 2023 period. Dr. Henry is supported by Mr. James Stewart, Senior Director, Economic Planning and Research Division. At the end of the presentation, we will take your questions. Dr. Henry, you may go ahead.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Good morning, everyone. Before I provide the details on economic performance, let me take this opportunity to remind you of the purpose of these quarterly economic estimates provided by the PIOJ. The PIOJ presents preliminary estimates on economic performance for each quarter, approximately 6 weeks following the end of the quarter being reviewed. This is based on the latest available information from major data providers. This release of the preliminary estimate is consistent with protocols in modern economies globally, where it is the common practice to release preliminary estimates before the final official figures are published. In the case of Jamaica, the PIOJ releases the preliminary growth estimate within the first 6 weeks following the end of the quarter being reviewed, and Statin releases the official GDP figures at the end of the 3rd month following the quarter being reviewed. The preliminary outturn is used by various stakeholders, including our international development partners, the private sector, as well as the government, for whom the magnitude and direction of sectoral performance is critical to inform planning and policy-related decisions. Today, we are reporting an estimated growth of 1.9% in real value added during the July to September 2023 quarter, relative to the corresponding quarter of 2022. The estimated outturn for the review quarter largely reflected the impact of 1, higher levels of employment, which supported the growth in demand, 2, increased capacity utilization in the mining and quarrying industry, and 3, continued growth momentum in the tourism sector, as reflected in the improved performances of the hotels and restaurants, other services, transport, storage and communication, and manufacturing industries. Real sector developments. Developments in the goods producing industry. The goods producing industry is estimated to have expanded by 2.3%, driven by improved performances in 2 of the 4 industries, namely the mining and quarrying and manufacturing industries. Agriculture. The agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry was estimated to have contracted by 9%, reflecting the adverse impact of drought conditions. Below normal levels of rainfall throughout the quarter resulted in lower yields and a reduction in hectares reaped. The industry's performance was reflected in declines recorded for other agricultural crops, which contracted by 11.8%. Lower production was recorded for 8 of the 9 crop groups, with the largest declines recorded for potatoes, down 21.2%, condiments down 16.6%, and other tubers down 14.1%. Additionally, lower output was recorded for traditional export crops, which decreased by 7.5%, largely reflecting contractions in the production of banana, down 6.6%, coffee, down 48%, and sugar, for which there was no production during the review quarter, compared with 25,107 tons produced in the corresponding quarter of 2022. Animal farming was estimated to have increased by 1.4% due to higher broiler meat production, up 0.6% to 34.7 million kilograms, and egg production up 11.8% to 66 million eggs. Mining and quarrying. Real value added for the mining and quarrying industry increased by an estimated 102% due to higher alumina production, which outweighed a contraction in crude bauxite production. Alumina production increased by 136.6% due to an expansion in the alumina capacity utilization rate to 42.4%, up 24.5 percentage points. This was driven by increased capacity utilization at the Windalco and Jamalco refineries, as operations gradually returned to normalcy following technical issues that constrained production at Windalco, as well as Jamalco's ramping up of capacity since its reopening at limited capacity in the corresponding period of 2022. Crude bauxite production fell by 4.9%, reflecting lower demand from overseas purchasers. The average bauxite capacity utilization rate decreased to 40.7%, down 2.1 percentage points. Manufacturing. Growth in the manufacturing industry was estimated to be 3.2%, stemming from increased output in both the food, beverages, and tobacco and other manufacturing sub-industries. Growth in the food, beverages, and tobacco sub-industry stemmed from higher production of condensed milk, up 92.2%, flour, up 58.8%, bakery products, up 3.2%, poultry meat, up 0.6%, rum and alcohol, up 16.6%, and carbonated beverages, up 3.3%. These increases were sufficient to outweigh declines in production recorded for beer and stout and sugar and molasses. The improved performance of the other manufacturing sub-industry mainly reflected higher production in the petroleum products category. All products surveyed increased, led by LPG, up 271.5%, gasoline, up 90.6%, turbo fuel, up 66.3%, automotive diesel oil, up 40.2%, and fuel oil, up 33.9%. Also contributing to the improved performance of the other manufacturing sub-industry were the categories chemical and chemical products and non-metallic minerals, driven by increases in the production of fertilizer, up 24.9%, clinker, up 13.5%, and cement, up 0.7%. Construction. Real value added for the construction industry was projected to be flat, reflecting an estimated contraction in building construction, which was counterbalanced by growth in the other construction component of the industry. The industry's performance was constrained by a 3.1% real decrease in the sales of construction-related inputs. The fall-off in the building construction component was due mainly to the performance of the residential category, reflected in a 66% downturn in housing starts by the NHT. Furthermore, the total value and volume of mortgages disbursed declined by 45.4% and 12.6% respectively. Growth in the other construction component was due to an uptick in capital expenditure on civil engineering activities, largely stemming from one, the National Works Agency, NWA, which disbursed $8.3 billion relative to $5.9 billion in the corresponding quarter of 2022. Expenditure was primarily for projects associated with the South Coast Highway Improvement Project, SCHIP, which is scheduled to be completed in March 2024. Two, JPS, which disbursed $2.3 billion, up from the $1.9 billion in the corresponding quarter of 2022. Expenditure during the quarter was for the construction and installation activities related to the generation and distribution of power. And three, NROC, which disbursed $1.1 billion, up from $889.4 million in the corresponding quarter of 2022. Expenditure during the review period was primarily for the May Penn to Williamsfield leg of the South Coast Highway Improvement Project. Developments in the services industry. The services industry was estimated to have grown by 1.8% relative to the corresponding quarter of 2022, reflecting higher real value added for all industries, with the exception of the wholesale and retail trade, repairs, installation of machinery and equipment industry, which remained flat, and the producers of government services industry, which declined. Electricity and water supply. The electricity and water supply industry was estimated to have recorded growth in real value added of 6.6%, reflecting higher electricity consumption. Electricity consumption grew by 8.4% due to higher consumption in 4 of the 6 categories. Higher sales were recorded for residential, up 12.1%, general service, that's small businesses using less than 25 kilovolt ampere kVA, up 10.3%. Power service, that's large businesses using more than 25 kVA, but less than 500 kVA, that was up 5.6%. And large power, that's businesses using more than 500 kVA, was up 10.1%. However, lower consumption was recorded for the category's largest power, as well as street lighting and traffic signals, down 0.7% and 4% respectively. In contrast to the increasing electricity consumption, water consumption declined by 0.2%, reflecting the net impact of a 6.5% decline in the Eastern Division and a 13.4% increase in the Western Division. Lower consumption was recorded in 6 of the 14 parishes, led by St. Mary, down 44.6%, St. Thomas, down 7.1%, and Kingston and St. Andrew, down 4.4%. Transport, storage, and communication. Real value added for transport, storage, and communication grew by 3.6%, mainly due to higher levels of activities in both the transport and storage and communication components. This outturn was largely driven by improvements in both the air and maritime transport components. For air transport, total passenger movements grew by 9.7%, reflecting increases in departures, up 11.9%, and arrivals, up 11.2%. The increased air travel was facilitated by a 5% increase in aircraft movements. Growth in the maritime transport was driven by a 21.9% increase in total cargo handled, reflecting increases in the Port of Kingston, up 10.8%, and outports, up 33.1%. The expansion in activities at the outports was due to increased alumina exports. Wholesale and retail trade, repairs, installation of machinery and equipment, R trim. Real value added for the wholesale and retail trade, installation of machinery and equipment industry was estimated to have remained flat due to higher levels of employment and growth in the related manufacturing industry, counterbalanced by a contraction in the related agriculture industry as well as a weakening in business and consumer confidence. Higher sales were recorded for 5 of the 8 categories in real terms, including other wholesale and retail sales of goods and services in specialized and non-specialized stores was up 1.1%. Motor vehicles, auto repairs and accessories up 28.1%. Hardware, building supplies, and electrical goods and machinery up 3.1%. Textiles, clothing, shoes, and jewelry up 7.5%. And retail sales of pharmaceuticals, medical goods, and cosmetics up 0.6%. Finance and insurance services. Real value added in the finance and insurance industry grew by 1.5% during the quarter. This outturn was attributed mainly to higher revenues earned at deposit-taking institutions from net interest income. Growth in the industry was facilitated by higher levels of employment and greater economic activity. Hotels and restaurants. Real value added for the hotels and restaurants industry was estimated to have grown by 8%. The industry continues to benefit from increased foreign national arrivals in light of the continued economic growth in main source markets. Preliminary data indicated that stopover visitor arrivals for July to September 2023 increased by 5.5% to 682,586 visitors. Cruise passenger arrivals was estimated at 178,412, a decline of 20.5% relative to the corresponding quarter of 2022. Visitor expenditure was estimated to have increased by 6% to $991 million relative to the corresponding quarter of 2022. Our GDP performance for January to September 2023. For the first 9 months of 2023, real GDP was estimated to have increased by 2.8%. This reflected higher real value added for both the goods producing industry up 2% and the services industry up 3.1%. All industries recorded growth in output, with the exception of the agriculture, forestry and fishing, construction, and producer of government services industry. Growth for the 9-month period was led by mining and quarrying, up 123.2%, hotels and restaurants, up 14.7%, transport, storage, and communication, up 5.4%, and other services, up 5.3%. For employment update. Regarding the labor market, Statin has already provided an update on the labor force survey for July 2023. As such, we will not present a detailed report on this area. The highlights, however, are that for the month of July 2023, the unemployment rate was 4.5%, down 2.1 percentage points. Youth unemployment decreased by 3.5 percentage points to 13.2%. The number of persons employed increased by 47,100 persons relative to July 2022. Male employment increased by 21,400 to 709,900 persons, while for females, employment increased by 25,700 persons to 605,200. The age cohorts with the largest increases were 25 to 34, up 13,100, 20 to 24, up 8,800 persons, and 35 to 44, up 8,700 persons. Sorry. The industries that recorded the largest absolute increases were real estate and other business services, up 14,000 to 150,800, and construction up 8,900 to 135,200 persons. I pause for effect. For For Vision 2030 or update, there'll be no update provided on the Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan at this time. The Vision 2030 Secretariat is currently working on the development of the medium-term socio-economic policy framework, or MTF, for the period 2024 to 2027, and will provide an update at our next briefing. So we look forward to that. For our short-term economic outlook, that's for October to December 2023, and for calendar year 2023, and for our fiscal year 2023-24. Generally, the prospects are positive for the Jamaican economy and is predicated on the continued expansion of economic activities in most industries. Increased employment level is also expected to result in greater domestic demand in the short to medium term. By industry, the continued ramping up of production capacity at the Jamalco Alumina Refinery is expected to result in relatively strong growth in mining and quarrying. For the month of October, alumina production increased by 4.6%. In addition, the hotels and restaurants industry and related industries, such as other services and transport, storage, and communication, are expected to lead the growth momentum in the services industry. Preliminary data on airport arrivals for October 2023 indicate an increase of 3.5%. Among the downside risks to this positive outlook are: 1, supply chain disruptions due to the impact of geopolitical conflicts and the potential impact on trade and transportation infrastructure and costs. In addition to the potential negative impact on demand and trade, these disruptions may also contribute to higher than desired inflation. 2, slower than anticipated recovery in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners, which may temper the external demand for Jamaica's goods and services. And 3, adverse weather conditions, particularly from hydrological events. The recent heavy rains, which followed a sustained period of dry conditions in the previous quarters, have further highlighted Jamaica's vulnerability to these shocks and the negative impact on the economy. Within this context, economic growth is anticipated for the remainder of this calendar year and the fiscal year. For October to December 2023, it is projected that the economy will grow within the range of 1% to 2%, resulting in calendar year growth, that is January to December 2023, within the range of 2% to 3%. For fiscal year 2023-24, the projection is for growth within the range of 1% to 2%. So in summary, preliminary data indicate that the Jamaican economy continued to expand in this post-COVID growth phase. Most industries have recorded growth, with the exception of agriculture, forestry, and fishing, which was affected by drought conditions. Growth was led by mining and quarrying, which benefited from the expansion of the capacity utilization rate at the Jamalco Refinery. Hotels and restaurants and related services and manufacturing continue to demonstrate improvement in this post-COVID growth phase. For hotels and restaurants, the industry continued to benefit from the ongoing expansion in room stock and effective marketing strategies, which facilitated faster than expected rebound in that industry. Growth in manufacturing may be partially attributed to pivoting due to the impact of COVID-19, which forced companies to offer new products and enter new markets. Continued strong performance in the labor market, shown by record high employment levels and record low unemployment rate, indicate that the economy is heading in the right direction. The real estate and other business services industry group has contributed significantly to this outturn, as the industry has moved from the 7th highest employment by industry group in July 2019 to the 3rd highest in July 2023, with employment numbers growing by 54,700 during the period. This is partly due to the expansion of business processing outsourcing, specifically call centers. Generally, indications are that the Jamaican economy will continue its growth trend within the short term, albeit at a slower rate. The drag on growth from construction is anticipated to weaken in the upcoming quarters as the impact of the high base effect dissipates. That is, there was a high level of capital investment in major infrastructure projects during 2022, given the stage of the projects being implemented, relative to 2023, when investment slowed as projects approach completion. As capital expenditure levels normalize and new projects come on stream, the industry is expected to return to positive performance. It is long recognized that sustained and more robust economic growth in Jamaica can only be achieved by minimizing the impact of weather-related shocks and expanding productive capacity, including skilled human capital. With respect to the impact of weather-related shocks, there are some ongoing initiatives which, when completed, are expected to have an effect in mitigating the impact of these shocks. These include the refinement of a project selection and prioritization tool, which includes climate change considerations to assist in the prioritization of projects for inclusion in our public sector investment program, PSIP. This means that projects which are supportive of building resilience will also be prioritized. Another ongoing initiative is the development of the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool, JSRAT, which allows for the identification of hotspots, that is, locations throughout the island which are most likely to be affected by climate hazards, the potential losses involved, and the assets affected. This will facilitate more targeted planning and aid in the development and prioritization of mitigation and adaptation efforts to minimize future impacts. The tool is currently being upgraded to incorporate additional functionalities by the developers from Oxford University through support from the UK Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO. Other partners include the Green Climate Fund, GCF, which spearheaded the second phase of the project to identify nature-based and other solutions to address the hotspots, as well as the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, the CCRI, which spearheaded the project. The Government of Jamaica, through the PIOJ, continues to work with our international development partners to find solutions to complex issues that have had a negative impact on our development over the decades. It is anticipated that with a continued targeted focus on addressing these issues, the country will continue to feel the effects of a more industrious economy and society. In closing, I want to recognize a very dedicated and hardworking team here at the PIOJ, and also to remind us all to continue our whole of society collaboration as we sustain our efforts to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Henry. You may use the chat feature, or if you're on YouTube, you can type your questions and you will be identified and your questions will be posed to Dr. Henry and Mr. Stewart. So while we're awaiting your questions, I'd just like to remind you, for those who missed the Dialogue for Development lecture by Dr. Peter Blair Henry and the best practice presentations 2 weeks ago, please visit our website for the YouTube links. Go ahead, look at what was presented, and you can send your questions or your comments to us. Gwyneth, are there any questions?
Mrs. Baker, we're monitoring the Zoom and we're monitoring the PIOJ YouTube channel, and we're also monitoring.
And I'll go ahead until Gwyneth is ready with hers. Dr. Henry, with the destruction of crops during the recent flood rains, what are the implications for growth in the upcoming period, given the huge contribution of agriculture to GDP and by extension, inflation?
So thank you very much. That's a good question. You've heard already soundings in the public space that with some of the destruction to the agricultural sector, we expect some increases in prices for some food crops, food items, and so we expect some inflationary impulse. The treatment and control of inflation is the purview of the Bank of Jamaica, And so you would expect to hear more as they continue to strengthen efforts, continue to carry out efforts to contain inflation within their target range of 4% to 6%. Will allow the BOJ to speak more on that. But already we've seen soundings from the sector and other stakeholders that we anticipate inflationary impulses through the damage to crops in that sector. In terms of growth, our forecast for the upcoming quarter of the 1% to 2% and the calendar year between 2% and 3% and the fiscal year 1% to 2% have incorporated the anticipated impact on the sector. We've begun to see and track those numbers. So we have incorporated those. But as we've said, the continued focus among our priorities is to continue to build resilience as a country, and particularly in a sector like the agriculture, forestry, fishing industry, which is very vulnerable. And so you're seeing more initiatives to build what we call climate smart agricultural practices and to build overall resilience for the sector to withstand these types of impacts of climate conditions, climate impact, the negative climate impact.
Okay. And the second one is 2 parts. Explain why we are seeing the lowest level of unemployment and various industry leaders are suffering from acute labor shortages. What are the implications on the unemployment levels if we are to import labor?
All right, thank you for that. That's a good point. So the concern of labor and almost the cause, what you're hearing for in identification and observation of a labor, the need for more labor in certain areas is consistent with record low unemployment. So you don't have a huge surplus of labor going around. No, our concern is, and there've been general discussions you've heard in many quarters, even among the government, in terms of the discussion recognizing the concerns of labor, discussions to upskill, to train more in the tourism sector, in the BPO. You've seen initiatives and programs to upskill and to improve the supply of labor to some of these industries. It's an ongoing discussion that we continue to have. There are initiatives to bring greater training and certification in the labor market. And so the key is to continue to ramp that up, and especially now to be training, upskilling in the right areas. So the concern may be that you have persons who may be looking for work and persons have used the term, they're not really employable. And so we're doing those assessments to ensure that we ramp up efforts to train and certify our labor. And so that is important in terms of discussions. In the broad context of the mobility of labor, part of the return to your human capital development as you train in whatever area, as you are skilled and certified, it should afford you the ability to move from one jurisdiction to another, to move from urban to rural, from rural to urban spaces, or the other way, so that it affords you mobility and access. And some destination countries are changing their paradigms to allow more skilled labor, more skilled migrants to come into the country, make it easier for them. Some are changing previous regulations to allow migrants to have full privileges in education, to train, to teach in schools where before there was, probation periods and hiatus periods. So you're seeing modifications to make it more attractive. And so persons, of course, Jamaicans have taken those advantages. And then we found persons coming in, returning residents, Jamaicans coming back home, and others in the region coming to Jamaica and elsewhere because they are skilled in certain areas. So the mobility of labor is a general factor. We don't limit. And I think those discussions will continue. We've seen, efforts by our training institution, HeartTrust, NSTA. We've heard the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Labor, and different discourses, dialogue on the programs being done and ramping up those programs to train more and in specific areas, listening to the industry, what the demands are in terms of the types of skills. So a lot of those efforts are ongoing. And so this is certainly something that we are looking at very closely as planners and as a government.
Thanks, E.G. This is from Maureen Weber, and I think you have touched on parts of it. it's a follow-up question. Although we speak about the economy, where are we with addressing lifelong learning?
So, and that's a good question. That would be for our Ministry of Education, our HeartTrust NSTA, for the Foundations for Lifelong Learning, those entities that are engaged. So it's something that we have to continue to inculcate, the lifelong learning. Our culture is something we've had discussions, even as an institute, having that mindset as we look strategically, how do we impress upon, just industry, a culture of lifelong learning in terms of how do we pinpoint those areas that we are allowing persons to be more, skilled in terms of enhancing abilities. We are going to be hearing in very short order, if you haven't heard already, that from the National Training Institute, MIND, the Institute for National Development, the Management Institute, just trying to inculcate in a new strategic thrust this culture of lifelong learning. So while MIND will train public sector workers, it's really about engaging persons who may be long-time practitioners, persons who are very skilled professionals, but identifying areas that they can enhance their learning in. And all of us have areas that we can enhance learning in. And so they've been rolling out that sort of initiative. You're going to hear some more about it. I don't want to preempt some of that, but it's a good point, Maureen, that we want to inculcate in a greater way in our society, a culture of lifelong learning. And there are so many areas, and I think we are seeing even in that aspect of MIND itself, broadening its scope of offerings and certification programs to offer facilities that people can continue the journey of learning, looking at the needs of the public sector, which are evolving. And so we know that as we advance going forward, that learning and training needs will evolve. We've seen in a post-COVID era that there is greater emphasis on technology and being tech savvy in whatever you do. We say technology is a cross-cutting issue in whatever discipline you are in. And so the need to engage and interface with the technology in a greater way. We have areas of leadership development, and we have leaders all across society, and the need to enhance their leadership abilities and skills. The issues that bring about greater trust, there's areas for learning in that. How do we build trust? How do we communicate more effectively? How are we more consistent in what we say and do? So many areas of learning and many aspects, but underlying it is a culture, a desire to embrace continued and continuous learning. And I think we are on that trajectory.
Thanks, Dr. Henry. I think we have come to the end of this presentation. Thanks very much for joining us and participating. Remember to join us again in February, when we will present on the performance of the economy for the October to December period. Have a good day and stay safe.